Welcome, guys. How you doing? How's SCaLE going? Wow, we must really... Oh. Are we sucking that bad? That's all you got? I said, how's SCaLE going? Much better, thank you. So our next speaker is one of my favorite people in the world. She has been with SCaLE forever, and she gave a talk. Was it last year? 2 years ago?
2 years.
2 years ago on child development, and it was like packed room. I'm not loud enough. No one has ever said that to me. Seriously. She gave a talk to a packed room. It was probably one of our first not completely technical talks, and she was nervous, and she fucking killed it. So she's back to kill it again. She's going to be talking about growth mindset, and I'm just going to give it all to her. So, Jen.
Thank you, Phil. I actually have a technical problem. Are there any technical people in the room? Technical people? Technical people in the room? I have a technical problem. If I could have a volunteer help me for a moment. I'm not a technical person. I do have a problem. I don't have a cursor.
Huh?
I don't have a cursor. Sorry, talk amongst yourselves. There it is. Okay, I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for coming. So to introduce myself, I work as an infant-toddler caregiver for the Conejo Valley Unified School District. My official job title is actually early care teacher, but I prefer caregiver because that's what I do. I take care of the babies and they teach me. So working with infants and toddlers, you get to observe the most pure learning that you're ever going to see in a person's lifetime. My job is often described as fun and cute, and it totally is. But most of all, it's brain development geek paradise. So it's my happy place. I wanted to share this quote with you from Carol Dweck, who I'm going to be talking about today. She says, "You never see an unmotivated baby." And this is so true. I wish I could bottle just a fraction of their intrinsic motivation for learning about the world. And people try to stop them from learning all the time without even knowing that they're trying to stop them, but it's impossible to do because they just have such a strong love of learning. So I'm on the fringe of the open source community, even though it looks like I'm like completely enmeshed in it right now. But I do support it wholeheartedly. I don't work in technology. I only know a few lines of code, but I've been using Linux since the late 90s. And the most that I do as far as the technical side of it is I'll support a bug report, submit a bug report when something is not working and I'm really irritated about it. I'm strictly an end user. The day of the Linux desktop has come for me. You may want to spread the word around. So the topics that interest me most in open source are where brain development, education, and open source intersect. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk to you about mindset, growth mindset, and fixed mindset. I'm going to talk about your amazing brain and the possibilities for change. I'm going to talk about dopamine. I'm going to talk about programmers. Are there any programmers in the room? Excellent. We'll get to you. I'm going to talk about why open source projects fail, and I'm going to tell you how this all fits together in a neat little package that you can take home and apply to your own life. So Carol Dweck is a professor of psychology at Stanford University. Is that better? Can you hear me now? Carol Dweck is a professor of psychology at Stanford University, and she's the one who developed the theory of mindset. She spent years researching it and sharing her research with others, and she's written a book about it. The book is called Mindset, so it should be really easy for you guys to remember and look it up on Amazon. And so at its core, the theory of mindset comes down to these ideas. Your intelligence and abilities are fluid, not fixed, and the brain continues to grow and change throughout your entire lifespan. So when I was preparing for this talk, it was hard for me to decide what points to linger on and what points to elaborate on, because to me, mindset seems like a pretty common sense concept. that everybody kind of knows about. But then I started asking people what they knew about it, and it turns out that not everybody's heard about this theory, and not everybody really understands what it's all about. Like, if you ask people if they know about mindset, they say, like, oh, like, you know, having a positive outlook, which is great. I hope that you all have a positive outlook, but mindset is actually about a lot more than that. So hopefully I'll provide you enough information that you can leave here feeling like you've learned something new about it. So when I found out that my presentation had been accepted for SCaLE, I went on Facebook and I asked people if they knew about mindset and if they were going to come to my talk and if they were excited to learn about it. And my friend Chris Smith commented and said that what he knew about fixed mindset versus growth mindset is that he definitely had one of them, and whichever one he had was probably the wrong one. If you were here last night, you might remember that Chris was the guy who won the laptop because he ranted for 60 seconds straight. So this image here gives you a really straightforward look at the heart of the theory. In fixed mindset, people believe that their intelligence and talent are fixed at birth, predetermined, really. You're either good at something or you're not good at it. Those people really believe in the idea of talent, whereas growth mindset is the belief that your intelligence and talent can go up and down over time. It's sort of like the nature versus nurture debate, gone one step further. So maybe you're the kind of person who has sort of an innate ability for art. You've been really good at it almost from birth, and people say that you're talented. But people who know growth mindset would argue that without nurturing that kind of talent, without putting in the time and dedication to that art, your ability could be lost or wasted or go completely unrealized. Talented people really apply themselves to their talents, and that's why they really become something special. Many people have either one mindset or the other, fixed mindset or growth mindset. You might be sitting there right now thinking, okay, that one is me. But some people are kind of ambi-mindset. That's me. So I apply a growth mindset to a lot of areas of my life. I'm really passionate about the subject, and I believe in nurturing the growth mindset in other people. But I found out as I learned more about it that I actually had a really fixed mindset in some areas of my life. So when it came to things like learning a programming language or learning how to knit or mastering a new skill at my job, I had no doubt that I could develop the necessary knowledge through practicing and reading enough about it and, you know, talking to other people and persistence and hard work. But when it came to math, I thought, I can't do that. So fixed mindsets, like my own mindset about math, they come from different things in your life. So you're not born with a fixed mindset. Nobody's born with a fixed mindset. But you can come to have that through things that happen in your life, experiences you have that make you think that you're just not good at something. So using my own case as an example, I have a learning disability called dyscalculia. So it makes it more difficult for me to learn math skills. And when I was in school, I'd get a lot of wrong answers because I tend to write numbers backwards. And so all those wrong answers and people telling me that I was wrong all the time about math made me think like, okay, well, I'm just not going to do that because that's not what I'm good at. So it wasn't until I was in my 30s and studying growth mindset and math at the same time that I realized that I was making things harder for myself with my fixed mindset. So now I simply refuse to accept that I'm not good at something. So let's talk a bit about the neuroplasticity of our amazing brains. So the reason that I know that my abilities are not fixed and that I could be amazing at math is because of neuroplasticity. So growth mindset can sound like kind of a hippy-dippy motivational concept, but it's actually based on really solid brain science and psychology. So the human brain consists of about 100 billion neural cells. And until fairly recently, it was believed that we were born with a finite number of neural cells, and that when one died, that was pretty much the end of it. But in the past decade, what we've learned is that the human brain is continually reorganizing, changing, and even growing. So it's been proven that certain areas of the brain can generate fresh cells and new neural pathways that develop throughout the lifespan. And it can become slower, and it can become more difficult, but it never, ever stops. So there's two types of plasticity in your brain. Structural plasticity refers to the changes that occur through learning, whereas functional plasticity refers to the brain's ability to move functions from one area, if your brain is damaged, to another part of the brain. And this is Jody Miller. I don't know if anybody's heard the story of Jody Miller, but if you haven't, you should definitely look for the videos on YouTube, do a Google search. So at the age of 3, Jody began losing control of the left side of her body due to debilitating seizures. The seizures could happen as often as 100 times a day. The electrical explosions on the right side of her brain were unresponsive to medication. And as her condition deteriorated, the doctors decided that half of her brain would need to be removed. That's called a hemispherectomy. So they removed the entire right cortex of her brain, and that whole area filled with cerebral fluid. Within 10 days after that surgery, Jody walked out of the hospital. She was just over the age of 4. So this kind of radical surgery is most successful in toddlers because their brains are still developing so rapidly. Jody lost some use of her left side. If you look at the picture there, you can see that she's holding her arm a little bit awkwardly because that's the side where she lost some of the use. But the surgery worked and the rehab worked. Before she had the surgery, she wasn't walking. Cases like hers are the most extreme examples of the brain's ability to grow and change and heal. But they're an example to the rest of us, those of us who have a whole brain in our heads, about what's possible with hard work over time. So what makes your brain change? Injury, rehabilitation, experiences, learning, and specifically failure. Measurable changes can be observed in the brains of people who are bilingual, in musicians, and even in medical students who are preparing for their medical exams. A 2006 study of German medical students showed learning-induced changes in the regions of the parietal cortex as well as in the posterior hippocampus. Those are the regions of the brain that are known to be involved in memory retrieval and learning. So my friend Maru right now is studying for the bar exam, and she's here at SCaLE. And if we did a scan of her brain today, we would see that it's much larger in some areas than probably most of our brains are because she's so actively studying for this exam and cramming so much information into her head right now. Did you know that to earn their licenses, London cab drivers in training spend 3 to 4 years driving around the city on mopeds, memorizing all the streets, the 25,000 streets within a 10-kilometer radius of Charing Cross Station, as well as thousands of tourist attractions and hotspots, to take an exam called the Knowledge. That's what a serious exam it is. It's simply called the Knowledge. It's unique to the London taxi licensing, and it involves a series of exams that only about 50% of people who try to pass it actually pass. So there was a woman at the University College London, a neuroscientist, who decided to research the brains of these taxi drivers. So she studied their brains, and she found that they had more gray matter in their posterior hippocampi than in people who were in similar ages, similar education, similar intelligence, but simply didn't drive taxis. So the longer someone had been driving a taxi, the larger their hippocampus proved to be, as though the brains were expanding to accommodate the cognitive demands of navigating all of those streets. So the changes to the brain, which I think this is the most interesting part of it, the changes to their brains were not permanent. Their brains returned to what we would call normal once they retired from driving their taxis. A similar study was done with jugglers. In fact, there's been a whole bunch of these studies done, so you should look them up because they're really interesting. But the participants in the juggling study, they had to learn a 3-ball juggling trick over 3 months until they could sustain their juggling for at least a minute. So these are people who previously hadn't been jugglers, but they had to learn this specific trick for the study, and they also had a control group who did no juggling. So they scanned them before they began the study, after they had mastered their juggling trick, and then again, 3 months later after they had done no more juggling. They were told, okay, you mastered the trick, you're done. And their brains showed a significant increase in gray matter in the part of the brain associated with processing visual movement when they had mastered the skill. Then when they scanned them again, after they had gone 3 months without juggling, the increase was gone. So Carol Dweck found that learning about how the brain works and understanding neuroplasticity can help people to engage more deeply in the learning process because they're aware that when they're engaged in learning, actual physical changes are happening inside of their brain. So when you understand brain plasticity, you understand that failure is never a permanent condition. And when Carol Dweck went to schools and began teaching the theory of mindset to children, She found children asking to solve hard problems rather than easy problems when given a choice because they wanted to feel their brain working and give themselves the opportunity for that growth. Making mistakes is the most useful thing to be doing. So when you make a mistake, your brain is going to actually fire twice. Once when you make the initial mistake and you think, oh no, I made a mistake. And then again when you go back and you think about the mistake that you made. So people with growth mindsets have been found to process their errors really deeply, whereas people with a fixed mindset don't like to think about the mistakes that they made. So it's really important that you not view mistakes as failures because your brain wants to repeat successes. And that's why small obtainable goals are really important to set for yourself, because then you're constantly flooding your brain with dopamine and you're moving forward. So there's physiological differences observed between brains with fixed and growth mindsets. In a fixed mindset brain, the brain becomes most active when it's receiving feedback like a grade or a score. In growth mindset, however, the brain becomes most active when receiving feedback about what could be done differently the next time. So growth mindset is often talked about in conjunction with grit, perseverance, stamina, being able to see the big picture. There's a psychologist who studies grit called Angela Lee Duckworth, and she has a great TED Talk that you can watch online where she offers some great insights into mindset because the two topics are kind of similar. So what is grit? Grit is stick-to-itiveness, resilience, but it's more than just optimism, it's determination. And there's a lot of overlaps between grit and growth mindset. And studies have shown that, like growth mindset, grit can predict success over and above talent. So what Duckworth says about her research is that when you consider individuals of equal talent, it's the grittier ones who do better. So intrinsic motivation is what I'm going to tell you about next, and I'm sure that most of you know what that is. It's doing something for your own internal reward. Intrinsically motivated learning follows your own curiosity and passion. Doing something nice for someone because it makes you feel good, that's intrinsically motivating. This stands in contrast with extrinsic motivation, which is like getting a gold star for being really well behaved, or completing a report because your boss said that you have to. In preparing for this presentation, I interviewed people who I think, from the outside observing them, have a growth mindset, even if they don't know it themselves. So one of the things I asked them about was what they do when confronted with something that they want or need to learn that's hard to learn. And the examples that they shared were awesome and diverse. This is a quote from my sister-in-law, Megan. And Megan's a person that I really admire for her growth mindset. She's a dancer, a dance instructor, and a runner. She recently taught herself to knit and crochet in like a matter of 2 days. And by day, she works in finance. So when I asked her to tell me about something she had to learn that was hard for her to learn, she talked about getting her master's degree in finance. And she said, I had a goal to progress in my career, and in my opinion, getting a master's in finance was a critical step towards achieving my goal. So when I asked her about what kept her going and what kept her learning when things were hard to learn, she talked about her pride. Pride is a subject that has been researched in psychology, and experts have identified two kinds. Authentic pride, which is fueled by the emotional rush of accomplishment, confidence, and success. Authentic pride comes from within, intrinsically motivated, in contrast with what they call hubristic pride, which is fueled by arrogance and conceit. And I think we all know people fueled by both extremes. So pride in yourself, as Megan describes it, keeps you from giving up because you want to be the best you can be, and you know that you're capable of accomplishing that. So then I talked to my brother, Peter. He's a biochemist, and he decided to get his MBA a few years ago, and he's always been a really determined person who loves to do hard things. For example, one year he made up his mind that on New Year's Day, he was going to participate in the polar plunge, which is something that crazy people do in our hometown. I grew up in Boston, and they run into the ocean on New Year's Day, which is often the coldest day of the year. But he made up his mind that he was going to do it, and he did it. So when I asked him about learning something that was hard to learn, he talked about the lab that he works in. So he said, working in the lab, I taught myself how to perform intravenous injections in mice. This is a technically difficult task, and I spent a lot of time reading, watching videos, and practicing until I was able to routinely perform these injections. So I asked him, what kept you going? What kept you from giving up on learning how to do it? And he said, I had told my boss I would be able to do these injections. And while I had done a few in the past, I was not nearly as proficient as I needed to be to perform my job. So he talks about how he doesn't like to lose, which is exactly what I would have said about him as a sister. But Carol Dweck's research has shown a difference between people who simply don't like to lose, like tennis star John McEnroe, and people who work really hard to win, like Tiger Woods. So when John McEnroe would lose a match, he would always blame it on something else. He was famous for his tantrums on and off the court. And so he would say, he lost that match because the wind was blowing too much that day, or something was wrong with his racket, or people were whispering in the crowd and he couldn't focus. He blamed anyone or everything that was wrong around him, never himself. But when Tiger Woods would lose, he would reflect on his loss and how he could alter his own performance. So Kayla Banks is a 13-year-old member of the SCaLE community who has spoken on technology topics in at least 2 states and 2 countries. She's 13. Kayla not only has a growth mindset, but she knows that she has a growth mindset because she's learned about it in school. So I asked Kayla about something that was difficult for her to learn, but that she did anyway. And she said, it was hard for me to learn Python. What made me keep trying to learn it is I was going to be able to go to Canada and maybe even meet the developers of my favorite game. And what keeps me from giving up is knowing that I can do it. And Kayla did speak at PyCon in Montreal last year, and she did meet the developers of her favorite game. And Kayla is a shining example of growth mindset because she knows deep down that if she works hard enough at something, she can learn it. And this is a plug for Kayla's talk this afternoon. She's speaking in the Next Generation track. She's a really great speaker, and she always inspires me. So I encourage you to go see her if you have the chance. My husband, Gareth, is an applications engineer. And when I asked him about something that was hard to learn, he talked about learning how to drive a car with a manual transmission. He said, the first car that I bought had a manual transmission, and I had never had to drive a car with a manual transmission before. I had to learn how to drive it because it was the car that I would be driving. I had various people attempt to teach me how to drive. Actually, Gareth's dad is in the audience, so there's someone in the room who remembers trying to teach Gareth how to drive. But it was a frustrating process for everyone involved. In the end, what worked best was just to keep practicing it again and again and again and getting the timing right for when to release the clutch and when to apply the gas until I had mastered it. What keeps me from giving up is the desire to figure out a solution to the problem. So earlier in my interview with him, Gareth had said, a level of stubbornness allows me to keep going until I found a solution. So like the early educator that I am, I've totally reframed that and called it persistence. Just like I would never tell you that your child is a difficult child, I would say how passionate they are. But there really is a difference. So Gareth is being stubborn because he wants to know the answer to that problem. He wants to learn that solution for himself, for his own knowledge and growth, not to prove something to someone else. That's the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And it's actually a big difference between Gareth and I, personality-wise. And you can see how I lean more towards a fixed mindset, and he leans more towards a growth mindset. When something goes wrong with my computer, he'll keep working until it's solved, but I gave up like 20 minutes ago. I also talked to my friend Colleen, a SCaLE volunteer, about something that was hard for her to learn, and of course she talked about math. So she said, I hate math with a passion. It is my second hardest class and hardest thing to learn. Just growth, 100% growth. But she takes her time with it, and she breaks things down into smaller steps, and she avoids getting help from her father at all costs. And she said it took time and dedication, and it still takes time, but breaking everything down just makes it easier. And part of what keeps me trying is because, well, I like when things are hard, and I have to work hard to understand. And when I do get the right answer, it's this high. There's nothing more exciting than getting a very hard challenge done. Colleen provided me the perfect segue into talking about the rewards of intrinsic motivation. The success, the high that Colleen describes, is a natural chemical reaction in the brain. So it's crucial that we not view failures, or not view mistakes as failures, and not view failures as the end of the world, because your brain encourages you to repeat your successes. And that's why small obtainable goals build on each other, flooding your brain with dopamine. I once read that dopamine is the Kim Kardashian of neurotransmitters because it's been linked to addiction to cupcakes, addiction to stickers, whatever you're addicted to. It gets a lot of media coverage, but dopamine is not just the pleasure chemical that it's been portrayed to be in pop brain culture. Dopamine is not only linked to success, but to near success, when you have to make a decision about continuing to try or giving up on something. Near success is everything, because that's when you make your decision as to whether you're going to have a growth mindset towards something or a fixed mindset. There's been studies done on roulette players that dopamine people who are drawn to problem-solving opportunities and communities. So full disclosure, I love open source. My first question about a piece of technology before I use it is it open source? Because I really believe in the open source way. But do I believe that open source is infallible? I do not, because I use it. And I've been using it since the 90s. So I've seen a lot of ups and downs, and I've had a lot of problems with it myself. Most open source projects are not successful. But open source is the arena that embraces that and understands the value of it, because the fact is most open source projects are not successful, and we know this because the failures are out there for the world to see, and they led to the successes. It's been studied. So Schweik and English literally wrote the book on this topic. They studied more than 174,000 open source projects that were shared on SourceForge, and their book is called Internet Success, a study of open source software commons. So they studied all these projects on SourceForge, and they found that most open source projects never make it past the initial release, and they wondered why. So they delved a little bit deeper to analyze it. And so they looked at what the common characteristics of the successful projects were. And those characteristics include vision, communication, a clearly defined set of users or needs, well-articulated goals, and modular architecture. Success was defined as they made it past their initial releases. I believe they had a more technical definition of success, where they looked at, how long the project was running, how well it accomplished the goals that it had set out to accomplish. You can look at their.
May have been successful for several releases, but then deteriorated as the communities often do, but still registered.
Yes. So each of the pieces that they found in their successful projects are complementary. So we're going to take a closer look at some of those points and where they align with the overall growth mindset. Each person that I talked to about growth mindset talked about setting goals for themselves. And this is important for individuals and for groups and for projects. So each person I interviewed talked about how they break difficult tasks into smaller steps. My sister-in-law, Megan, described the connection between vision and goals really articulately when she was explaining how she learned to knit and crochet. She said, over the past few weeks, I taught myself how to knit and crochet. Thinking back on that experience, the first thing I did was pin items that I wanted to knit and crochet to a pin board on Pinterest. So that was her vision. This is something that she wanted to do. And then she broke that down. So she said, I have the goal to learn to make the items that I pinned. So step one was setting the goal, and the next thing was to do the research and set my expectations. So she watched videos and read instructions, and she learned what tools she needed to buy and what she should expect along the way. And then her final step is just to go for it. She said, procrastination is my pet peeve. So once I have some ideas with a little bit of knowledge, I give it a try. And here's Kayla's advice. I had to include this because it's the best advice I've seen. So Kayla's advice is to take baby steps, because some things are actually hard to learn. She said, I don't think I'll just learn how to be an engineer by the time I graduate. So I recommend just taking little baby steps until you're running a marathon. To be successful, projects need to successfully communicate. And this is where sometimes things fall apart. If you take a look at Kickstarter, you can see thousands of projects trying to get off the ground, all kinds of things that they're trying to accomplish. Most of the ones that succeed do so not because they have a great idea, but because they're able to effectively communicate that idea out. They're able to articulate what they're doing, what they want to do, what you can do, and why you would want to do it. So I mentioned documentation because this is a lament that I hear from many people in the tech and open source community. They go to fix something or to build upon something that exists, and they find no documentation or really crummy documentation, which is frustrating and defeating. That's poor communication. And then there's feedback. So earlier I mentioned the measurable differences between the fixed mindset brains and the growth mindset brains when it comes to hearing feedback. Carol Dweck took people to the Columbia Brainwave Lab, and she studied how their brains behaved as they answered difficult questions and received feedback. What she found was that the people with a fixed mindset were only interested in hearing feedback that reflected directly on their present ability, and they physically tuned out the information that could help them learn and improve. They just didn't want to hear it. They showed no interest in hearing the right answer even when they'd gotten the question wrong, because they'd already filed this away in the failure category and they were never going to think about it again. Whereas the people with the growth mindset were keenly attentive to information that could help them expand their existing knowledge and skills, regardless of whether they'd gotten the question right or wrong. In other words, their priority was on learning. Schweik and English's study lists modular architecture as something that successful projects had in common once they achieved their initial release. But they note that many abandoned projects were also modular, so that in and of itself is not enough. So I surmise that the underlying component of success is flexibility. If you're like me and you weren't sure what modular architecture looks like, it's a way that future development tasks can be carved out at different levels of complexity, so that other developers can come in and know what they could work on. And this would allow for a growth of your project by opening up to a more diverse pool of workers. So it's important to be open to changes along the way when you set your goals. My sister-in-law Megan made a point of saying you are allowed to modify your goals and expectations along the way. And this can be really hard for people with a fixed mindset to do, because once they decide on something they're going to do, it's hard for them to think outside the box and to allow themselves to change things as they move forward. So if you're on board with me, you might be thinking about the areas of your life in which you could use more of a growth mindset. So let's talk about how you can apply some of the things we've talked about. Whether you're fostering a growth mindset for yourself on a personal level or in the workplace, mentoring is a really valuable tool. Everyone that I interviewed talked about the people that they learned from: mentors, colleagues, parents, friends. And it's really important to note what a mentor truly is. A mentor is not a role model. You look at a role model from a distance and you're inspired by them, and that's great. But a mentor is the person who's going to give you that direct and specific feedback that you need. Someone in your real life who's going to work with you. And I think this is something we need to see more of in the open source community, or just in the world in general. So in my workplace, I'm a mentor teacher, and college students who are studying child development come to my classroom for a semester to work alongside me, and they receive my feedback, they give me their feedback, and I learn so much from them. It's a great process to go through, because the best way to learn something is to teach it, which was part of my motivation for this presentation. So mentoring is really common in my field, but less common in some others, and that's too bad because it's invaluable to the growth process. SCaLE had a mentoring track which took place yesterday. I was able to go to a few of the talks there, and it's definitely becoming more of a part of the conversation, which is really exciting. So I urge you all to connect with potential mentors at SCaLE. It's a great opportunity to talk to people who share your passions, and who have more experience with something than you may have. So if you're a mentor, I would also urge you to seek out people at SCaLE that you could possibly help. I would like to leave you with a thought from the motivational penguin, because I believe in you, and so does he. So this is how you can foster your own growth mindset. You can challenge yourself to learn new things. You could start with learning about brain plasticity, because that's going to be super inspiring to you. And if you're open to the idea of growth mindset, it would be helpful. You need to create a vision and set your goals. And when you decide what you want to tackle, plan a step-by-step approach. Think about what you've learned about dopamine and give yourself the opportunity to reward yourself along the way. Figure out who can help you with your goals. I'm sure there's someone in this room who could scaffold your learning. You need to talk to yourself with a growth mindset, and you're going to feel really silly about it at first, but think of all the negative messages that you may give yourself throughout the day. This was a big problem for me. They even added me to this list. I can't do math. So that used to be my attitude, but now I tell myself I'm going to train my brain to do math. I even put math games on my phone, so when I have downtime, I can do math, just for fun. It's ridiculous, because now I'm a person who does math. but please don't ask me any math questions or ask me to do math in the hallway. So when I talked to people about their growth mindsets and about how they learn hard things, they all talked about going online and using technology. Their research didn't always end there, but it's a really good starting point for anybody. The internet is an awesome tool. So a few months ago, my vacuum cleaner broke, for example, and I had no idea how to fix it, and I was driving myself crazy trying to solve it with all kinds of tools, and I had it spread out across the kitchen, and then after almost an hour, I thought, you know, I bet this has happened to somebody else. I should look it up on YouTube. So I went to YouTube, and I had my vacuum fixed within minutes. So I put all the resources that I used that I've spoken about in my talk. I put them all on the slides, and my slides will be available on the SCaLE website, so you can take a look at them and browse at your leisure. And I'd like to give special thanks to the people who allowed me to interview them about growth mindset, especially Kayla Banks and Gareth Greenaway and Colleen Johnson, because they're in the audience, and Philip Banks. And thank you all for coming and listening so attentively. I think we have a little bit of time left if anybody has questions.
All right, so I can buy into a growth mindset, but I'm wondering how perhaps I can find others who might not buy into it so easily and get them to buy into it more.
So that's something that I'm always trying to do because I'm really passionate about it. So I kind of, as I talk to people, I kind of assess in my mind what kind of mindset they might have, and it's usually pretty easy. Like once you learn more about growth mindset, it's pretty easy to ask people questions and figure out what they think about their own abilities. And I mean, especially if you work with people and you're having an ongoing conversation about projects you're doing or tasks to accomplish, you'll figure out really quickly like what people on your team have a fixed mindset and which have a growth mindset. And then you just need to, you know, that's your vision. You need to set some goals about how you can help them and expand their thinking. And I mean, one of the best things you can do is introduce them to the concept of growth mindset, because once they learn about how their own brain works, they may be motivated to try to do things differently. It can be hard. Yep.
In order to adopt a growth mindset, I've often found, just with people in general that I've dealt with, a lot of times it's not until they decide it for themselves that they want to do something.
Right.
Now, in order to help somebody who hasn't gotten to that point yet, what would you normally recommend? Is it just study the growth mindset, or is there additional?
Yeah, I mean, talk to them about it. You might, if it's someone that you're getting to know pretty well, you might want to ask them about the experiences they had with whatever you feel like they have a fixed mindset about. Like in my case with math, like it's pretty obvious why I developed a fixed mindset. And so once I became cognizant of that, it was easier for me to work towards a growth mindset. So, you know, making the information available and, I don't know, maybe like reframing challenges for them, you know. So when they come up against something that's really hard and their instinct is to give up on it, talking them through that, you know, helping them push forward, and then talking to them at the end and saying, like, you know, this is me as an early childhood specialist saying this, but saying to them, like, you know, you tried so hard and you really got it. Like, that was really uncomfortable for you to keep trying it, and you did it. Those are the kinds of things that I say to children, so. Yep.
So my kids, they have a similar thing called the Google mindset. They don't know how to read a map, and
Right.
they don't memorize phone numbers like I did in my youth.
Right.
How do you discourage, or how do you encourage a growth mindset without discouraging the use of technology then?
That's a great question. We're living in a different time than we were living in when we were growing up. Like, I don't really memorize phone numbers anymore either. So I think it's important for us to realize that things are going to be different for kids today than they were for us. So really, if the way that they're using Google, is it to make solving problems easier?
Yeah.
So they don't know any other ways to solve a problem other than taking it to the Google?
It's really like my 4-year-old complained that there's no Wi-Fi in her bedroom. And it's a really funny but sad situation where, you know.
Yeah. So the last talk that I did at SCaLE 2 years ago, I talked about children and technology and ways that they can use technology that's meaningful rather than ways that are just kind of mindless and maybe making their life easier but making it harder for them to think. So those are things to think about like what things you can give your kids to do that will engage them in a more deep, meaningful thinking process, and modeling it yourself. So, you know, when you have somewhere to go, maybe take out a map, you know, maybe they don't know about maps, they haven't seen maps, so maybe show them, you know, we're going to go from here to here, let's take a look at the map, and there's our street, and there's the street we're going to, and, you know, showing them examples of ways that you can do things so that it's a process that they can actively engage in. It's always good to start with yourself. Yep.
Stop, like, strong criticism, like, from a drug father branching at you from getting you in a fixed mindset?
I think at that point, you have to decide what kind of mindset you're going to have for yourself, because there's a lot of different situations that lead you to a fixed mindset, and there's really nothing you can do about those situations or those people that put you there, but you can make your own choice to move forward, and you can foster your own growth mindset. Right.
I know, like, I've worked with technical expertise in this area, and I know I kind of role model it a little bit. Like, you have a situation, you know, the sheet you go to the talk for, like, you pick up on what people are thinking, even though they might not say it out loud, and you can kind of say out loud to them something opposite of what maybe you would be under.
Right.
Are you missing something? Do you need something like behind it?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Over time, working together with people, they'll start to put those thoughts in their heads.
Right. The more you put it out there and the more you share it with other people, the more natural it feels. Baby steps. Just like Kayla says. Always listen to Kayla. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you.